Hi everyone, we're back with another video, and today we're talking about webhook documentation. Tom, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. So obviously at Six, we take our documentation really seriously. We treat it as effectively part of the product itself. And so I went and looking at not just our docs, but some documentation from big webhook providers. And I also got some feedback from Twitter on what are the things that you really should be including in your webhook documentation to make it as easy as possible for your users to receive from you. So one of the top responses was an event catalog. So could you explain exactly what an event catalog is, how you might implement it in your documentation?
Yeah. So event catalog is essentially a fancy name of saying like the list of all the events that you send, their schemas and their examples. So if you send an invoice created kind of event, you will also have an example showing exactly, like a real example of how a payload would look like, but also a schema with like the precise definition. For example, we use JSON schema for that, but you can use, whatever you want. And then, like another part of it is kind of like explanation for when each event is actually triggered, right? Something like invoice created on its own. I mean, that one is maybe a bit self-explanatory. But if it's kind of like
Well,
task
hopefully it would be,
done,
right? Like
yeah,
hopefully it's named in such a way that it's self-explanatory.
yeah. But like oftentimes, like you're just like, wait, how do I even like set in motion the sequence of events that triggers this message? And it's not always obvious. So I think like that's a combination that people forget, and I kind of like that's why webhooks are part of your API. So kind of like linking it well with your API is like a big part of it of having like great docs for webhooks.
Okay. Okay. So the second most popular feature for webhook documentation was testing. Like, how do you actually test to make sure that your webhooks are working?
Yeah, I mean, like testing is a huge part of everything, right? And like in order to make sure that your integration works, you definitely have to test it. Um, there are a few aspects to it. It's not an easy topic because like it's essentially an event coming in and needs to be sent from a service to you, so it really adds like a lot of complication. I'll touch on that in a second. But the first thing is even just like send test events, so like give your customers an ability to just trigger an event, and the data doesn't need to be real, but just an event of the right type and the right structure, so they don't have to go and like we talked about like invoice create in a moment ago, so they don't have to go put in their credit card, buy something, trigger the invoice create, and only then like have the message sent. Like you really want a much faster feedback loop. So like a way to send test events with like different payloads is an important one. Watch out, don't give them a way to send custom payloads, because that is essentially a good way to compromise your security, because you're giving, yeah, we talked about it, I think, in the security video, but essentially you're giving them like full control of sending payloads from a trusted IP address, yada yada yada. Not a good idea. So like avoid that. Have like preset examples. That's an important part. Um, and then the other aspect is actually, there's, when you want to test it with a local environment, there are many tools to support that. I mean, there's like ngrok. There's also like Swix Listen, which is part of Swix Play. So we give you like a CLI to open a port to the wide internet from like into your computer, so you can like test integration directly with your local implement development environment. But we also, Swix Play also has kind of like this capture mode, so you can just send directly there, and then you can like manually process the examples and like examine them and like see what the webhook was actually. Um, and then the last part, we actually, one member of the team is working on something really cool, which is essentially like a UI for a website, I guess, like to manually verify and manually sign payloads using a specific
Okay.
key and like a signature scheme that's like followed by, like by Stripe or by Swix and Swix customers and all of that. And this way you can easily like both verify the signature was correct, and both kind of like write a test invocation of like a curl invocation in order to like kind of like send yourself whatever test webhooks you want. And this, I don't know if people really fully grasp like how useful that is, but like this is something we see on and over again with like, hey, how do I actually create a custom payload and send it to myself in an easy way? And I think that's kind of like why we decided to build it.
Well, I think it also goes into the next point, which is like the third most important thing, I think, in terms of including in webhook docs, is just how to actually verify the signature, right? And so
Yeah.
for me, like I've built a few like, kind of toy endpoints here and there, and like the testing, like in sending the test webhooks, I used it the most when I needed to verify the signatures.
Yeah. I think, like verifying the signature is like one of the things that people find most confusing. We're building some stuff to make that even like to be able to make that much easier for people. And we actually have like a lot of open source libraries for people to like easily verify. So we're already actually making it quite a lot easier than it has to be. Um, yeah, than it currently is. But yeah, this is still like a sore sticking point. And the first thing you want to document is kind of like the signature scheme. Like, how do you even sign signature? Like, how do you even sign payloads? Like, what do you concatenate? What do you actually sign? Like, what? How do you take the key, um, and and how the signature is built? And then the second part is kind of like how to actually verify. Like sometimes there's a timestamp. What's the tolerance you want to allow? Um, and like how do you do it in framework X or framework Y? Because like for example, you'd see that in most of the node payload frameworks, they usually parse the payload to JSON, and then most people what they do, they kind of like do JSON stringify, and that is not always 100% exactly the same as what was sent, and that breaks things. So you really need to like have like framework specific guidelines. And we actually, I mean, I think we're doing a fairly good job with like documented that. And this is not Swix specific. Like people can just look and like how to do it with like a specific framework and copy that and then use the same for Stripe or for whatever other webhook provider. Um, and obviously the last part as well is kind of like code samples, right? I mean, like explaining something is one thing, but like you also want to give them like real code that they can use and copy paste and like really kind of like check out. Yeah, did I miss anything? Was that like everything that you sell?
For verifying signatures, yeah, I think that pretty much covers. I mean, the next thing that I have on my list is error handling, right? So how do you actually respond to different errors, and how do the
Yeah,
receivers need to actually respond?
yeah, that's a great point. So, there's a lot to it. So, I mean, I think first of all, as the sender, like if you're offering webhooks to your customers, you kind of like um, need to define like how they should respond if there is an error. So like what is a successful response code and what is like a failure success response code, and kind of like how do they notify you that something failed? Like we
Or
had
something
one.
succeeded?
Often, exactly. Like we had a case, or maybe multiple times, that like a customer's customers, like so someone using Spix, their customer was returning like a payload that said okay, but with an so a payload that said like error with a status code 200. So they thought that's all they need to do to like let Spix know that there's been an error. But no, obviously we read the 200, which is like an okay HTTP response, and we're just like, okay, that's a success. And that was kind of like something that caused confusion for them. And so it's like very important to like just document like what do you expect, like what is your behavior. If it's a 500, like what do you do? If it's like a 400, what do you do? And like etc. It's very important to document. Um, the other thing is like you want to explain to them how did they recover from errors. So like assuming like there was a failure for like a few days, how can they replay all of the events, or how they can replay specific events? How do they debug? Like what went wrong? Like what was the payload of the message? Like they need, they kind of like you need to guide them in order to know how to know what went wrong, if that makes sense. And I think that's like a big important part. I think that's it probably. Well, those are the main parts anyway.
Yeah. And I think related to kind of just like errors, like sometimes your receivers, your end users, their endpoints are gonna fail.
Yeah.
So I've seen, in good docs, like they actually lay out like how do you recover from that failure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I think first of all, you know, I'll give you an example. It's on Slick's case, like you can just like click on a button in the UI, say like recover all failed messages or recover this failed message. So I think definitely like screenshots or like directions to how to do that. Like, like a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Mhm.
That's definitely like one of those cases. And especially because, like when they want to recover, it's probably kind of like an emergency or like at least like a bad situation. And the last thing they want is more stress and trying to like figure out like how to do that easily.
Yeah, they're already freaking out, and something if you don't want to make it any harder for them in those
Yeah,
situations. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Um, And then there's just like a few more that were pretty popular, pretty common, like whitelist IP addresses. Right? You want to talk a
Yeah.
little bit about why you might need those?
Yeah. So, like a lot of organizations, especially larger ones, they have strict firewall walls, rules, maybe because of compliance, maybe because of like just security policies that they have. And they only allow IPs to even hit the web servers from like a specific range, on IPs from a specific range. And so they need to know which IPs are you going to be sending webhooks from. And documenting that is obviously like a precursor for them actually like allowing those and and enabling those in their firewall. And kind of like one thing that's almost slightly buried in this statement is that don't change that list, or at least don't change that list without notifying people well ahead in advance so they can actually go and like update their firewalls. But really, the recommended path is do not change that list, or at least if you have to change that list, keep old customers on the same pool of IPs and add new customers to the new pool of IPs. So at least people can always like snapshot, what they got, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They're always going to get from like the IP that you promised them.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. And then the last thing on my list, which actually I thought would be super popular and pretty common across them, but actually there's a decent amount that I looked at that didn't have this, which is the actual retry schedule itself. So obviously, like when
Yeah.
yeah, when things
Yeah, I don't
fail,
know
like
about it. I think like like maybe people don't put it on the docs, maybe because they don't retry. We've seen implementations where people just like do a one shot, and if that
that's
fails,
true. Yeah.
they give up. And side note, these are terrible implementations. Like like the internet sometimes fail. There are reasons to fail. You definitely want to retry.
Hmm.
So that's probably like that probably accounts to some of the ones that you've seen.
I have seen some
And
that also they'll specifically say like we retry 5 times. That's it.
yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I don't know. Like, really, I would expect you to put the exact, like, what we do, for example, was we tell you, like, we wait 5 seconds and send again, 30 seconds and send again. And, there are like caveats that maybe we kind of like allude to, but not like fully document. So, do we add the jitter on failures? Do we penalize endpoints that return a 429, which is kind of like the rate limit endpoint? Like, do we do like all of that? We do, and we don't specifically lay out all the algorithm that we follow, like every step of the way. But we do. I think the important part, and this is something we definitely do, is kind of like give people the indication on the understanding of what is happening. So like if there is a failure, how are retries going to happen? Like when should they expect the fifth or the fourth
Yeah.
retry? I mean, I think that's something that's like extremely important. I think to have, so people can, yeah.
Yeah. So Tom, like I don't know if you had any others off the top of your head, but those are the ones that I kind of had on my list and got from the feedback.
No, I mean, I think this was fairly exhaustive. I wonder. I mean, if we forgot something, like please, leave it in the comments. Let's hope the comment field is going to be empty and we haven't forgotten anything. But
Or
yeah,
perhaps if you're someone who receives uses webhooks a lot, and like there's something you want to see and nobody has it, like not even us. Like maybe
yeah.
there's just something that we're all missing because we're all too busy sending the webhooks and not really receiving them. Uh, all right, so
Now we
yeah,
also receive webhooks, and I think many
that's
people also receive webhooks. But yeah, I mean, I
true.
think you know the people that know best are probably the people that tried something and were very frustrated when it didn't work. So yeah,
Yes, if you got frustrated trying to make webhooks work, which is going to be a decent amount of people, let us know what it was that
yeah,
frustrated you the most.
yeah. I think that makes sense. Cool, but yeah, I think that's it on my end.
All right, so thanks, Tom. If you have any other topics that you want us to discuss, let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.
See ya.